have to be your biggest fan. And when things are really tough and they're really rough and nothing's working, but there's something inside of you that says, I just have to follow that. Because you don't know who you're going to meet, who you're going to meet, who you're going don't know who you're gonna meet, who you're have to be your biggest fan. And when things are really tough and they're really rough and nothing's working, but there's something inside of you that says, I just have to follow that. Because you don't know who you're going to meet, 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 who you're going to meet.
Some of you have heard me say that the right to vote is precious, almost sacred. In a democracy, the right to vote is the most powerful, non-violent tool we have.
Hey guys, what's up? It's Quentin James, co-founder of The Collective. I want to thank you all so much for being here for our Black Men Voting Forum. The Collective was founded in 2016 to build Black political power. And what we've seen in 2020, we know there's a critical election coming up. One thing we consistently hear from Black men throughout the country is the lack of communication, lack of engagement, lack of conversation that really centers them in terms of why they should vote, what the issues of importance are to them. In 2016, we know that 7 million Black men didn't show up to the polls. We want to change that. So today, we're so excited to be joined by our moderator, Marc Lamont Hill, and our panel will feature Franklin Leonard, Shaka Senghor, and Mayor Michael Tubbs. Turning over to you now, Marc.
Hey everybody, I'm Marc Lamont Hill here with the Black Men Voting Forum. We are in a crucial moment in history, and never has it been more important for the entire country, really, to come out to vote. The Black community is no exception. We need high levels of representation at the polls, just as we do every year. And one of the key conversations that we have to have right now is how do we get Black men to the polls? What motivates us to vote? And I am going to start by asking a very basic question. You know, before we get into any of the details about voting in society, I want to know sort of where you are as Black men. What does it mean at this juncture in history to be a Black man in society? Mayor Tubbs, I'm going to start with you.
I'll start me with this heavy question.
Yeah, I was like, all right, thank God. Yeah, let the mayor handle it.
Your turn is coming though, Franklin.
Well,
Yeah, but I got time to think about it now.
what's interesting is that a year ago I didn't give birth, my wife gave birth to our son, a Black boy. And I think because watching him grow up, particularly during this year, it's made me really think about sort of what does it mean to be a Black person, a Black man in 2020. And I think the biggest thing is kind of marshaling sort of all the wisdom, all the insight, all the courage, and all the strength of our ancestors to continue this fight that they've been engaged in for 400 years in this country. I think as a Black man in 2020, part of it is a reckoning with fighting all the forces of dehumanization that from the time you're born or from the time you're in the womb that seek to define you as less than or not human, and still do what's necessary to kind of make it better for not just for Black men, but knowing if you make it for Black men, you make it for everyone. So to answer your question, I feel as a Black man in 2020, I feel a little bit tired and weary that we're still having these same conversations, still having the same fights. I feel oftentimes that our solutions, which I'm excited to dig into in this conversation, are necessary but not sufficient. And that, yes, voting is absolutely important, but the vote in and of itself is not going to make the changes that are required. But I also feel resolute in understanding from a legacy of Black men who fought this fight with less resources, less of a platform, less of an ability to make change. And they were able to make some things happen. So I feel a responsibility to them and to my son to be a good ancestor and make sure that we make it better so that when he's 30 years old, he's not having the same conversations.
Shaka, you want to jump in?
Yes, sir. I mean, I'm amazing, and I'm gonna give context of why I feel amazing. You know, I spent 19 years in prison, and I grew up in prison as a kid around other young Black men. And where we at today, you know, nearly 30 years from the time I walked into a prison, to me, I think is the most opportune time for me to extract the wisdom from that experience and apply it to problem solving. And what I mean by that is, you know, when you're in the suffering and you're at the bottom of society and you're forgotten about and you're beat down and you begin to make the connection between what happened to your ancestors, if you can come out on the other side of that, you realize that there is new possibilities in a new day. And so because I've been able to come out on the other side of some of the most horrendous conditions and understand that in those darkest moments is when you actually can find your light. And we're living in those moments right now. So as Mayor Tubbs spoke, you know, I'm a dad of a brilliant 8-year-old Black boy. And I'm conscious of the consistent refrain I hear. What are you going to teach him about now? You know, what are you saying to him in the midst of this social upheaval? And what I've chosen to do is approach the rearing of him with love, in that I don't allow the social conditions to unravel, you know, my responsibility as a dad to impart to him the power of love. You know, when I think about Breonna Taylor and I think about our sisters who don't feel protected, I feel it's a great opportunity for me to instill the values in my son so that any woman that's in his presence feel protected and honored. And that feels amazing. You know, I feel like, you know, as we're looking at the upheaval of the educational system, and I know I have direct responsibility to holistically educate my son in the midst of this global pandemic and the social upheaval, feels amazing because now I can apply the things that I've learned and to connect broadly with, you know, the legions of Black men who I know that hold each other accountable, that are challenging social norms, that are saying, hey, we do have a responsibility here that we can walk our young men through. I think this is the opportune time because if it doesn't get this bad, then we don't take it as serious. And because it's gotten so bad, to me, I think it creates the perfect spaces for us to have real conversations, especially with the young brothers on the block who people are consistently, you know, demonizing because of their failure to engage with a political system that's refused to engage with them unless they're in the courtroom. And so now is an opportunity as a man who comes from the street culture, who can talk that talk, who grew up with hip hop, to actually have real conversation with young men about the importance of using their vote, especially in local elections. And to also just show them that in the face of adversarial experiences, you can exhibit courage without, you know, allowing it to the experiences to destroy you or tear you down, and you don't have to wake up sad and you know, feeling, you know, like you're outside of your body when you can actually embody all the things that you're learning right now. And I just think this is a great time for us to either exhibit courage or cowardice. And so I've chosen courage, and that feels amazing.
That sounds amazing. Franklin, jump on in.
I was gonna say, after that, I feel like I could run through a brick wall uninjured.
Sure, brother.
Truly. I mean, look, I think I'm feeling a lot of emotions right now. And I think I'm feeling them in the extreme a lot. One is hopeful, mainly because I look around at people like Shaka and you, Mark, and you, Mayor, and I see how strong we are and how legion we are, and how clever and witty and industrious and courageous and creative we are in response to the things that wish that we were none of those things. But I'm also tired and sad and, you know, joyous and happy and free and unbothered and angry and scared and pessimistic and optimistic and realistic. And I think the mayor really summed it up best, though, with resolute. You know, I think that if anything, what we've been experiencing over the last couple of months has made me more resolute in the face of all the things that I knew exist, and that I think on some level we'd all been gaslit into thinking maybe we were the crazy ones for seeing this in the world, for seeing the way the systems were functioning, the ways in which those systems affected us in micro ways and in more significant macro ones. And I keep coming back, and it's interesting that both of you referenced your sons. I don't have any kids yet. My fiance describes me as being broody. I'm definitely headed in that direction. And I'm looking forward to it. But I think a lot about my parents. You know, my father grew up in the 60s on that Georgia-Alabama border. He was at Tuskegee during the Civil Rights Movement. His father never finished the 5th grade, but spent most of his career as a cook in the Army. His father was born a slave in West Central Georgia. My mother's mother is 102 years old, still kicking. And, I think about what she's seen in the century plus of her life and what it has meant as a Black woman over that time. I don't really have, as bad as it is, at a minimum, I have to match their work and I have to match their survival instinct, because I wouldn't be here if they hadn't. And I'm going to have to leave something, whether it's my kids or the mayor's and Shaka's or anybody else's. The least I can do is make sure that they're able to continue the relay. And so more than anything, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not really looking to compromise. And I'm resolute about what's necessary for us as Black men, for us as Black people, inclusive of Black women and people who have other genders, and for all people. Because I think the thing that I keep coming back to too is mistreatment of any of us is mistreatment of all of humanity. And we all lose in people's failures to recognize our common humanity. And so I want the world to be better for all of us, not just for Black men too, and especially, but for all of us, because we're all going to be able to have a better thing if we get it together and recognize each of us as a reflection of each other. So I don't know how effective that answer is.
No, that's very effective.
I don't. You can quote it back to me tomorrow, and I'd be like, I have some edits. Because it really is day to day for me right now.
But that's good. No,
but that I think captures most of it.
No. I think that's right, and I think it's day to day because of the moment we're in, and that's part of what I want you all to help me make sense of. Right? Is Shaka started to talk about sort of how he's doing amazing, almost despite the moment we're in, and how he's responsive to it, which I think is really powerful. And the mayor talked about being resolute in response to this moment, and you're kind of not ambivalent, but you're certainly you like me, depending on what day you ask me, right? So then the question becomes, what is it about this moment that has us feeling this way? How do you make sense? I asked you before sort of what it meant to be a Black man in this moment, but what does this moment mean to you, not just as Black men, but just as a Black person navigating this world? What does it mean to be in this juncture in history? What are you experiencing? What are you seeing? How would you describe this moment?
In one word, destabilizing. And I think that makes it really hard for me to describe it any further, because I just don't know what it means yet. And I think that what it means is still to be determined by our actions, by other people's actions in response to this moment. But I do know that it's destabilizing, in the sense that it is forcing a lot of introspection for a lot of people, myself included. And it forces people to sort of analyze the assumptions they've made about the world, whether they'll continue to make those assumptions, how they're going to change those assumptions in response to the world that they now realize is either what they believed it to be but been told it wasn't, or that they're now realizing that it is without having realized it prior. But the honest answer is I don't know. And I'm very skeptical of anybody who claims to, because that will be clear in time. But I don't think that anybody can fully appreciate what we're going through, because this is literally a world historic moment. And with change that we have never seen before.
Well, I want to press y'all on this a little bit, because people are going to be watching us, and and I think you're right. I mean, I think there's a way that this moment can't be made sense of, right? Yet we're going to need some distance from it. It might be in 20 years that we'll look back and say, yo, we was really going through something. But there are some concrete things we're dealing with right now. What are some of those things that you all see as concrete issues that we're facing that are making our lives harder, more challenging, more difficult, or that demand the kind of resoluteness and defiant spirits that we're demonstrating, right? We're defying something, right? Whether it's white supremacy, whether it's environment, whether it's whatever the thing is. What are y'all feeling? What are y'all experiencing right now? What are y'all seeing?
So I want to dive in, and I like that you're really pushing us on this. So when COVID stay-at-home orders first hit, I kind of watched people go through these deep anxiety and all the things, and I thought about what was that thing that they were experiencing, right? And so what I did is I reflected back on the most difficult part of my incarceration, which was a 4.5-year stretch in solitary confinement. And I remember what made that so difficult is it was an indeterminate sentence, and they wouldn't let me know when I was getting out. So it wasn't like, hey, you're gonna be here 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. It was maybe today, maybe tomorrow. And what it did is it gave me a high level of anxiety and depression because the uncertainty. And so the uncertainty of this moment has been challenging on a societal level because this is the first time we've had a disruption of our life in this way, right? You get COVID, then it's the social upheaval. So I think of the social upheaval as this is an opportunity for us to grow up, as a society and really determine like who do we really want to be. When I look at the protests in the early stages and how so many white people came out and protested, I had to question whether that would have been happening had the quality of their life not been disrupted by COVID. Mm. And I am not convinced that it would have. What I am convinced of is that this was par for the course for many of our people living in marginalized communities. And this is why there wasn't as extreme of an emotional response, because if you're living with the fragility of walking outside your front door and being murdered in your own community, being accosted by police in your own community, and then you're like, COVID, like really, like a cold gonna keep me in when this reality is what it is. And that's not to minimize what COVID really has turned out to be, but it's to really contextualize that we live in not just two Americas, we live in multiple Americas. Because, we have white America, Black America, brown America, but even within the Black community, there's multiple Black Americas. And so I think that there's a reckoning happening that we have to undergo, that we have to really sit with ourselves and say, okay, what have we done to make our brothers and sisters who aren't affluent, who aren't college educated, who aren't politically educated, feel connected to a reality that has dismissed them consistently. And so those are the things that I've been thinking deeply about. And I think that's what this moment is. It is a deep reckoning for a lot of us, the super woke legion who go bananas on Twitter, but you can't find them in the community amongst the people that they're challenging and criticizing for not showing up at the polls. Like, that's problematic. So it's a moment that we have to reckon with. We have to address that reality. Our hip hop and entertainment community that has run roughshod over the realities of the everyday Black folks who are doing the work in our communities because of the social attachment to salacious material when it comes to speaking out about these issues. Like, those things are problematic, right? And so it allows us this great opportunity to say, you know what, we should be thinking more about ownership so that we can actually be really in control of our narrative and not having our narrative dictated by those who cut us a paycheck. And that we have to hold each other accountable in these spaces, and we can't let people off the hook just because they have 1 million followers. And in fact, we actually need to be challenging in these spaces. As much as we want to challenge the brothers and sisters in the hood, we need to challenge these social influences.
Challenge the powerful. Yeah, it's easy to challenge the powerless, the relatively powerless. Yeah. Challenging the powerful, that's where courage comes in. That's where commitment comes in. That's where sacrifice comes in. Yeah. You don't lose nothing for beating up on poor people, but when you start holding celebrities accountable, politicians accountable, etc., it's a whole different ballgame. That's actually where I want to pivot. And since we got a politician in the building, Mayor Tubbs, I'm going to start with you. What should we be demanding for Black men? And I want to be very clear. We're going to talk about a lot of things, but I'm starting with this idea of Black men because the question was, how do we get Black men to the polls? How do we get Black men to advocate for their needs? How do we do that?
I think to Shaka's point, this moment is really a challenge. I think we've spent so much time idolizing and memorializing the folks that came before us without doing the work to emulate and understand that white supremacy didn't die when Dr. King gave his I Have a Dream speech. that the issues that he fought against, he said before he died that they've actually become calcified and are reintegrating into a burning house. We have so much more work to do. So I think this moment is the answer to the question we all asked ourselves in 8th grade history. Like, if I was in the civil rights movement, what would I be doing? Exactly what you're doing now. And I think it's a reminder that we have to get to the root, and it demands us to be bold and audacious, and to not settle for kind of piecemeal and incrementalism on some issues, because we're having the same conversation we've been having for 400 years. In terms of how to help, or what should Black men in specificity be advocating for, I think first and foremost, we have to be sort of intersectional and very clear that's not going to be one thing that's needed, and that we deserve, by virtue of our humanity, to have all the things, right? And all the things meaning kind of access to healthcare, all the things like a guaranteed income floor, all the things like some sort of reparative policy or reparative amends made for the atrocities of the war on drugs. We need all the things, and not just criminal justice reform and police reform. But I think it's easy to get stuck there and not understand that we need economic justice, that we need great schools, that we need real opportunities. So I think Black men in specificity have to demand for basic human dignity, this notion that we are equally human to everyone else in this country, and we deserve all the things that this country knows folks need to be successful. Inputs in terms of early education, access to high quality preschool and good elementary schools, sort of neighborhoods with more grocery stores and liquor stores, et cetera. If it sounds audacious and ambitious, because it is, but it's also necessary. That's the type of communities that those of us who are successful and go to college that we now live in, I would argue those are the communities we have to at least do the work to start to build for everyone, and particularly for Black men.
I think that's right. I want to throw another piece into this as I go to Franklin, and that's mental health. We need to be thinking about mental health resources, mental health access. We need to be able, there's no one who can navigate this world that we live in and not need support in terms of mental health, right? Shaka talked about anxiety and depression in the context of segregated housing units or solitary confinement, or all these other sort of labels that prisons use to torture people. But there's also the kind of trauma that comes from seeing your homies die in the neighborhood that you live in, the kind of trauma that comes from being surrounded by premature death in the United States. And to be Black is to be vulnerable to premature death. To be poor is to be vulnerable to premature death. And being confronted by that means that we got some real mental health work to do as well. And that's part of the advocacy we have to do. So as we talk about education, housing, safety from police, food, clothing, shelter, mental health is something I just want to put out there on the table as we continue to talk and think about all of this stuff. But I wanted to go to you, Franklin, to help me, again, think a little bit about what our needs are. What do you see our needs to be?
It's interesting. I was taking notes and making a list for how I would answer this question, and it lined up almost identically with the mayor's answers. I mean, literally reparative amends, healthcare, and I would include mental health care as part of that. There is no healthcare without mental health care.
Absolutely.
People tend to think of healthcare as the body, but it is also the mind, because the mind-body connection is a real thing, and your body's not worth much if your mind isn't right, and your mind's not worth much if your body's not right, right? As well as one can be. And so I think that kind of care is seminal to existence in this world. I can say proudly, I've been in therapy for over 10 years, probably wouldn't be here without it. I encourage everybody who has the resources now to take advantage of it, to take advantage of it. Your life will be better for it, and we should be advocating to make sure that everybody has that access. But fundamentally, I think that at the root of all of this is a word that America has wrapped itself in since its inception and never delivered on, and that's justice. Black men don't want more than what we deserve as human beings. Like the mayor said, what we want is what every human being wants. We want safety, security, the opportunity to provide for our families, the opportunity to provide for our ancestors and for our parents. That's no different than my white, Asian, Latinx, whatever friends, right? But at the end of the day, there's a specific reality to the experience of being a Black man in America that has prevented us over the course of, more than 400 years to have access to those things. And in addition to be able to provide for them now in 2020, There is a reparative process and a reconciliation process that must take place in order for justice to be born. And so not only is it we should have healthcare as every American should have healthcare, we should have access to mental health care as every American should have access to mental health care. We need to address as a country, from a policy perspective, what the consequences were of that denial over the course of the nation's history. And until that reparative conversation comes alongside the policy prescriptions that are specifically to address the present day, they're largely hollow because justice hasn't been addressed. And I think that those are the things that we're fundamentally asking for. And again, it's a single word, and it's something that everybody wants and everyone deserves as a human being, but it is an incredibly ambitious project and one that we have to be incredibly assertive about demanding for ourselves.
I have some questions about getting people to the polls, but it would be irresponsible to not also talk about our relationship to Black women. Black men are often positioned as the leaders of this community. And historically, when we've had civil rights movements, when we've had freedom movements, too often Black men have been positioned at the front at the expense of Black women. So one of the things we have to think about and take very seriously is how do we create space so that Black women can assume their rightful position as leaders with us, not instead of us, not behind us, but with us. And second, we have to think about harm, right? Black men have been harmed in so many ways in this society, but we also have to think about the various ways that Black men do harm and commit harm within our own communities. And one of those primary sites that I think we should have to interrogate is with regard to Black women, whether it's sexism and patriarchy, whether it's creating gender equality, whether it's eliminating domestic intimate partner violence, domestic abuse, whether it's thinking about sort of sexual violence, rape culture. I mean, there's a range of stuff, and I know we can't unpack every single issue, but I do think we have to really take seriously the question of, as Black men, as we're fighting for change in society, what kind of self-work should we be doing? What kind of internal work should we be doing? What's our call? What's our responsibility? What's our charge?
Yeah, I'm happy you brought that up, and I think it piggybacks off the last question when it comes to our mental health and well-being. You know, I grew up in a very abusive household, and the majority of the men that I served time with had similar experiences. So early adverse childhood experiences were a real thing. High levels of gun trauma. In my family alone, 8 of us have been shot, a couple of us on multiple occasions. And so growing up with that high level of insecurity as it relates to the physical body, and then you go into a prison system that exploits that body, it's hard to come out with your mental faculties in order, right? And this is not even just for those of us who've been through the incarceration system. This is those of us who have just grown up with these high levels of trauma that go unaddressed. So like Franklin, like I'm serious about, therapy and the importance of it. And I think there's a great correlation to how we have shown up or not shown up for the women in our community. And when you don't have, as a man, when you have the inability to access your emotions in an authentic way, it's impossible for you to be emotionally available for other people. We talk about how we treat our women, but if you go back to source and see how we treat each other, like we would kill each other literally over nothing. And whereas we may not kill our sisters in the volume at which we do to each other, we definitely inflict harms upon them in a manner that's parallel in terms of numbers. And so, a lot of this stuff is rooted in the trauma associated with the enslavement of our ancestors that was handed down and encoded in our DNA on up to the things that happen in our household, in our community, that we actually have learned how to justify or make fun of. Like, I can't tell you how many conversations I've been in with grown men who make fun of the fact that their first sexual experience was when they were a child and it was at the hands of a grown woman. This kind of warrior badge that's associated with their sexual exploitation as young kids, and not even being able to see that this was wrong. I can't tell you how many conversations I've heard or bear witness to where we glorify the beating of our children as the only means by which to discipline or correct their behavior. and the end result is somehow I am okay solely because I didn't end up in prison or end up dead. But despite having dysfunctional relationships, inability to manage a household, and the repeated pattern of abusing children, the acknowledgement that this is somehow makes you okay. And it's ridiculous. So there are so many different layers and reasons why this behavior persists. And it's up to us to challenge, and it's up to us to say, okay, is there another way to raise a child without hitting them? You know, as men, do we have a level of responsibility to hold each other accountable when it comes to the emotional rearing of specifically our Black boys? Because at some point, those Black boys are going to have an impact on the young Black girls growing up in our community. And how do we hold each other emotionally accountable? How do we actually say to a brother, I love you? And with the acknowledgement that love is actually powerful and not weak. How do we not diminish our brothers who are affectionate and loving toward their children in a meaningful way? And so we have to create that culture. And I think we're in a space now where you're starting to see more and more, you know, accolades bestowed upon men who show up as full, whole fathers, and not just the father that can teach you how to beat somebody else's ass, but also the father that can teach you how to love and hug and cry when needed, and that can sit at night and educate you and do affirmations and lift you up in spirit and still instill some discipline in you in a way that allows you to move through the world in the fullness of your being.
That's incredibly powerful, brother. And we got an election coming up. What can we do to use this election as a way to get us closer to the goals that you all are talking about? Better mental health, a greater chance at high quality education, a greater chance at early education, a greater chance at reducing violence in our community, a greater chance of improving our mental health, a greater chance at having food security. How do we, what does voting in November do for that? Because there are a lot of people out there who know they should vote, but there are a lot of people out there that are still unconvinced that there's a relationship between the world they want to see and they're taking action in the poll. So Mayor, I'm gonna start with you because I know you believe in voting. What do we do?
Yeah, well, I think first of all is just being realistic about what the vote is and what the vote isn't, right? So the vote is necessary but not sufficient, meaning that not voting creates a self-fulfilling prophecy where nothing changes, right? And with the vote, you're able to leverage power to create a more fair terrain to do the harder work of pushing and organizing and pushing your elected officials to enact the policies to create the world that you want. So I think part of it is understanding that democracy, particularly in this country that's struggling with a legacy and contemporary white supremacy, is not an easy sport. You don't get to just do one thing and everything's fixed. It's not going to be done for you. But if you don't vote, you're not in the game. And I think part of it is also letting people know that their vote is not more important than them, meaning that your vote matters because you matter. Your experiences, your life, your block, the things you see, that they matter so much. And because they matter, we needed to show up at in voting. And I think that messaging would be super helpful, but then also just being very clear, very, very clear. If the vote didn't matter, foreign governments wouldn't try to influence the vote to get the results they want. If the vote didn't matter, I think we spend a lot of time thinking about the sacrifices that Dr. King and John Lewis and Septima Clark and Fannie Hamer made to get us the right to vote. But on the flip side, folks were willing to kill, were willing to murder, were willing to rob, were willing to commit arson to make sure that folks didn't vote, which speaks to power. If we look at the 10 years after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, when Black folks were able to vote, when Black men and women were able to exercise franchise without being lynched and beaten, things changed. That we had laws on the books, that we had governments in the South that looked like the population they served, and that's why we had 100 years of Jim Crow after. So the vote is not all powerful, but it's definitely powerful, and we diminish the limited power we have in the society. We don't exercise the one thing we know will get us to a place where we can push for all the policies. It's definitely by voting.
Before we go, I want to get your last two responses to this, Shaka. Like you say, you in the streets, you in the hood, you talking to young folk, you talking to grown folk. What do you tell them? What message do you have for them to get them to the polls?
Yeah, I talk to them about local elections and the importance of that, right? A lot of times when we're thinking about the bigger national election and we kind of get caught up in all the rhetoric that goes with that. We're not thinking about the local election, the judges, the way that impacts you, prosecutors, council people, mayors, and like that impacts your direct day-to-day reality. So being able to talk them through that is super important. Couple of quick things. One, we have to talk about, when we're talking about voting, we have to talk about how many people have been disenfranchised because of felonies on their records, things that we're fighting to change. Some places, if you're on parole, probation, or have a felony on your record, you have been disenfranchised and you can't vote. And we don't talk enough about that when it comes to like changing laws. And then the last thing, a lot of our brothers and sisters who are held in county jails don't know that they still have a right to vote because they haven't been convicted of anything. So it's equally important to inform people of what their rights are, when those rights have changed. And we just got to do a better job of getting out on the block and just talking to young people and aiding them through the process of getting registered to vote.
Franklin, I give you the last word.
I don't know a single person, I don't know a single Black man who would defer any decision about their life to somebody else, and specifically not to a bunch of folks who know nothing about their lives. And fundamentally, you may not like the options, you may not agree with everybody on everything, but at the end of the day, if you're not voting, I promise you somebody else is, and they're making the decision for you. And that, for me, I may just be petty, but I'm not letting anybody make that decision without my input. So at a minimum, I'm gonna make sure to be a part of the decision, and that's what it comes down to for me. And I feel like on some fundamental level, I don't know many people, and not very many brothers for sure, who are willing to say, you know what? Let me let those guys figure it out for me. I'm sure they have it covered, because we've already seen they don't, and so they need our input, and we damn sure need our input, and that's why I vote. Like, wow. Fundamentally, I'm just not letting anybody else make decisions for me.
I want to thank you all for giving us so much insight and really brilliance. The work you all do in the world, the work you all do in your personal lives, and the analysis that you offer are going to help all of us feel a little bit better, a little bit stronger as we navigate this crazy moment. And at the end of the day, everything you told us is just a greater reminder that we have to get to the polls on November 3rd. We have to go out there and vote, because the decision about this election will not be made by the margin of people who vote, but by the margin of people who don't. People who want justice, people who want justice over jails, people who want freedom over failed policy, people who want to imagine a world and then bring that world into fruition have the ability to do that. But if we stay on the sidelines, we won't be able to see it. And even worse, the world that continues to harm us, undermine us, define us as non-human, cage us, kill us, stigmatize us, erase us, that world will continue to get more and more powerful every time we don't cast a vote. So everybody out there, brothers, hold each other accountable. Make sure you go out to the polls. Don't leave Black women to do this work for us. Black women are on point. Look at the poll numbers. They on point. They show up. They show out. They vote. And they vote the right way. We got to do the same thing. Hold each other accountable. Go to the poll November 3rd. Bring somebody. Bring a bunch of people. Call up your whole crew. Bring them all out. Make sure we vote. Make sure we commit to everyone else voting. And make sure we create the world that we want to see. I want to thank y'all for joining me. And there's so much more coming up right after this.
Comment. It's so good. Such an honor to be in conversation with you, especially on a topic as important as thinking about Black men, Black male participation in sort of the civic electoral process. As a Black man in America, as someone who thinks deeply about these issues, why do you believe that this 2020 presidential election, which is currently and happening right now in the middle of this storm, why is it pivotal for the future of our country?
Yeah. Well, first, Darnell, I want to say peace and thank you. I'm grateful to be here with you. And this election is significant. Elections have been significant throughout our lives, but this one is important because I believe that the leadership in the world has been at a place where it's been leaders and people causing dissension, causing more dissension, and not really serving as what leaders what we want leaders to do, what we need leaders to do, which is actually like serve people and like look at all aspects of life that you're leading and say, how can I feed these people in the best ways possible and give them the best chances and give them the recognition and respect and honor that they deserve being in a leadership position. Well, we haven't seen that leadership. And we've been in this state for the last 4 years, and we see where it has gotten us. And I just believe that, man, I haven't experienced anything in life where I've seen someone, I mean, it's politicians, I've never been like, oh man, I love this, Ronald Reagan. I mean, I felt as a kid, I knew that something wasn't right with that either with me. But I think the lack of leadership and the ignorance that's being spewed out is just like causing chaos that is unprecedented. And I think we can say whether it's about politics or not, you can see what happens when you don't have a good leader in a space. Like, we've had some not good leaders, but when you have a terrible leader, and this election is like, if we allow that to continue to happen, man, this country is in a tough place, in a really tough place. And another thing I got to say too is really a lot of the things that we've been marching for and standing up for, protesting for, fighting for, speaking about, like, a lot of those issues are in the hands of people that we elect. When you look at Breonna Taylor and what we're still saying, justice for Breonna, man, the people in Kentucky allowed that district attorney to be, they voted him in. So we got to take some responsibility for the people, because if you get the right district attorney or state's attorney in place, like in Chicago, we have Kim Foxx. You get the right person, then you will see justice being served, and like, these are things that are direct effects of us voting. So that's why this election is extremely important. But I believe every election has been important. I didn't know that at the time, but every election is important, and this one is just as important.
You brought up something so important, the value of local elections. And yes, we need to vote, of course, for the presidency, right? But there are local elections, and not just candidates that we vote for, but propositions that we vote for that actually do shape the way we live our lives in our communities. Everything from policing to who are in our courts, and all of those things are just as important as voting for the presidency. But I want to, you said, there are people who are probably listening to this, right, who are still thinking about this idea. Is voting for me? Should I be voting? Do these folks care for me? You just said something that just stuck out to me. I didn't always know this was important, right? And talk about sort of what was that transition moment for you? What was the light bulb aha moment that made you go, you know what? This is actually a duty that I need to take seriously.
Okay. For, I would say, 25 years of my life, well, once you're 18 is when you could vote. So from 18 to, I believe I was 30, I was like, this politics is what is it? It's not relating to me. I don't relate to it. Nobody represents me. These politicians are out here lying. I don't believe them. It was the time when George W. Bush was running, that I was surrounded by different people who were, talking about politics. And I was talking about the community work that I'm involved in and what I do. And they just brought it to my attention how some of the access that we want in providing for education and different elements that was affecting my community was directly affected to policymakers. And I just felt, to be honest, I walked to that ballot box like, I'm not 100% sure that this vote is going to change anything, but I got to at least know I did something. I can't just say I care about humanity and care about people and care about my community and don't make an effort to say, man, I see that these policies, when it comes to policing, healthcare, education, when it comes to just having trash in your neighborhood cleaned up, it's people, city officials, it's government officials, elected officials that make those decisions. And I just had to recognize that and say, yes, I'm always going to be community building. I'm always going to be doing stuff for my people, like with programs that's outside of government structure. But I also can do the work within the government structure because that is affecting my families and our communities too. So that was the turning point to George Bush. And then, Darnell, the next step was like, oh, I actually see somebody that is running that I identify with in President Obama. And this is somebody that I've witnessed in their treatment of human beings, in their intelligence. I've been at events with this gentleman before he was, running for president. And I see this is actually somebody who really represents what I believe in and what I think. And I don't know all of his politics at the time, but I could see a good leader, a good human being in him, and somebody who I know would at least consider what's going on in our communities. And that was like the light bulb really illuminating, because I was saying, it made me see that, wait, there are people in politics that are you and I. And identifying that, I said, I have to go out, and I can't be lazy. I can't be like, just be like, oh man, this politics stuff don't matter. It was like, no, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do, because I can find the people that are, or I have somebody, run. I'm not running for politics, but we can have people that are us run. And that's what's happening, man. I've been to Minnesota and met with Ilhan Omar, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. I met with Ayanna Pressley. These women are so intelligent, so powerful, so us. How could I not make sure that these sisters and women are not reelected? I got to make sure that I do my diligence to make sure that they are in office.
As you're talking, it's making me think about this idea that when we vote, it isn't just for us. It is not for me. My vote is not just for me, but it is really on behalf of the people I claim as community. Yes. I'm voting for the folk who exist on the edges of the margins, who need policies in place that does not legislate against their life. And you had that turning point, but you also talked about your work. You've been really active for a long time in the community. And after the election, you vote. The next day, there's still work to be done, right? To make that vote make sense in the real world. So what can people do? What actions can people commit to after election day to keep the work going, to do the work of transformative justice?
Well, Darnell, you said something important earlier anyway. You said you're not only voting for a person. In many ways, sometimes you're voting for the policy. And so once someone is elected that you've supported at least some of the policies that they represent and what they are planning on doing is in office, it's up to you to hold them accountable. You hold them accountable by every step from the city level to state level, making sure, like figuring out, okay, I actually elected you because I know that you said you would do criminal justice reform on this state level. So you hold them accountable by seeing what are they doing, what steps are they taking. If they are not taking the steps that they promised, you gather people and galvanize people that will go sit down and say, hey, we demand this of you, or you're not being reelected. I've sat in front of a politician. I've literally sat in front of a politician in the state of California, in the Capitol, who was a good guy, a good person. I knew it. And he said, man, I don't know if I can support this bill because my constituents may not support it. And that being said, if you galvanize enough people to say, hey, these are the things that we need in our community, politicians also want to hold their jobs. They want to be held in that office. And another thing is discernment is important, man. Like, I'm not like telling you to go vote for this person, like without you, doing your research, doing your diligence, and feeling it with yourself. Like, my mom told me about Obama when he was senator, told me, like, my stepfather, they were all telling me. But until I really saw and like just watched myself and realized, oh, this is the person that was at the hip hop summit, blah. That's when I was like, oh, I'll support it. It's up to us for us to get on our radar. Like, we got to spread the word. Like one program that I'm a part of is called Urgency 2020. Our thing is about teaching, educating ourselves and others about who is down the ticket in these important places, like a South Carolina, where you have someone like Jamie Harrison, who can actually help shift the energy in that state, but also in the Senate by getting enough people who think alike, then work can get done. So that being said, it's really identifying those people and us holding them accountable post by galvanizing and having groups there that say, this is what we expect of you, demand of you, or you won't be reelected. And I know that's a gamble, and he's like, well, I got to wait more years for that, but it takes time. It takes time. It like, as President Obama mentioned, the civil rights movement, they were working on the Voting Rights Act in 55. It happened in 65. This is not a movement. What we're doing is not just for tomorrow. It's for like centuries from now. It's for decades from now. It's for our families to be good for long term. And we have to recognize that. And I believe, that's part of the process and the journey that we have to go through to undo all the stuff that was there, as you said, 400 years ago.
Look, you just said a word. Discernment is key. Discernment is key, and accountability, right? And we don't shun accountability. And actually, a good leader, a good politician would expect of their constituencies, of the people in their communities, to hold them accountable. And this work is love work.
Yes.
It's love work. You know what I'm saying? I do believe, like, I define love as the energy that removes any barrier that keeps me apart from the other. Anything that keeps us separated from the other, right? Love is that energy that brings us together. It is at the heart of community. Talk about the role that love plays in the work that you do for community, and how does it show up in terms of the work you do around racial justice, mass incarceration, immigration. Love is at the heart of that. Talk a little bit about that.
First of all, I love your definition of love. That's one of the most beautiful definitions of love that I've ever heard, and it really crystallized what love is about. Love has shown up. Our great Angela Davis said, revolution is love. And love has shown up for me in so many ways, in revolving ways that is revolution, and ways that is change. I mean, love shows up for me, with the organization like Common Ground that I've had for years with our youth in Chicago. I'm doing that because I care about these young people. I care about our young people having access to having visions and dreams for themselves, having resources, being exposed to new things. For me, that's love in action, because it's not only me letting you know, speaking it is important, but then the action comes about where I have programs, and the mentors who work daily with our youth really have interaction and back and forth with our youth about like what's going on in their lives, and having dialogue, and everything is not always perfect, but it's worked out, and we get to places where our kids feel like, they know they are valued. They know they are on this planet to do something great and purposeful. So that's love in action. When it came down to me being able to express love, to people who are incarcerated, it really came down first to me just listening to the women and men who I met who were incarcerated and hearing them out. Them being heard and them being recognized as human beings is an act of love. And that in itself meant something to them. But the way I felt like I could take it up notches and do more was to actually be part of policy change. We did concerts and gave them love. That was, art is a great way to show love. We did concerts in the prison, and it was incredible. We reached human beings who said, man, I've never been to a concert in my life before. Thank you. And people who also said, I forgot I was in prison coming during this whole time. So they felt that love in the music. Love always comes through in that way. But the activism and love and dealing with criminal justice reform really came about in us being able to go and meet with, like I said, legislators and talk about bills that we wanted to see become laws. And one of those was a law that was dealing with juveniles being sentenced to life without parole. And this we're talking about in the state of California right now. And we got a bill passed. And that bill being passed, SB 394, which became a law now, that no juveniles would be sentenced to life without parole, without being seen at some point. It really, not only was me feeling like we were doing something to act of love, but it really gave a lot of love to my life because it was one of the most important things I ever been a part of. And that policy is something that is, when we talk about politics, that let me see like, this is policy change right now. This is actually affecting somebody that I know that would have went to jail for and would have been in jail for the rest of their lives. But they've shown that they've grown and healed and came through it. And now they actually can live a life and be treated as a human being. That's policy. That's voting. That's political work. And I've seen it happen. And that's love too.
It is love. When I think about love, I also say to love is to not lie.
Yes. Speak on it, man. Come on.
And I think that's super important, right? Because when you love something, you're going to tell the truth, even if that truth is a critique. And that's what social justice is, right? It is about revealing the things that we need to fix. And that's love work. And I'm so grateful for the work that y'all did here in California, my new home state. For two more questions before we have a little bit more time. I have two more for you. We're talking about love, which also brings to mind interconnectedness, this notion of connection to the other. What COVID has revealed, we love social media, new media technologies. We like texting, we like being online, but the moment we were all put on punishment by a global pandemic was a moment that it showed how important human connection is, how important intimacy is, touch. Given this sort of idea around interconnectedness and the need for connection, this new normal, how can we translate that, take that same energy into our relationships as Black men? And like when it comes to gender equity and our solidarity with Black women, how can we pour that energy into our relationships to Black women, our mamas, our sisters, our partners, the stranger on the street?
Well, I think it's important as Black men that we recognize that the Black woman and women were created by God in equality with us. For so many years, the mentality of men systemically, us individually, has been like, oh, I'm stronger than you, I have this. Well, certain things physically, we have differences. But soul-wise, spirit-wise, purpose-wise, man and woman are equal. And recognizing that is, first of all, like a essential thing that we overlook sometimes because our societies don't perpetuate that normally. They don't encourage that. So I think recognizing that is and acknowledging that is super important. And also creating, as Black men, creating environments where we honor our women by the way we treat them, but also knowing that by honoring them, we also honoring ourselves. Like by, understanding that yo, this woman has power. This woman has intelligence. This woman has not only beauty, but has a presence and a purpose that's her path. And we have to be able to allow that and respect that and honor that and support those things. And I think that will help build our relationships. But one of the things that's important, Darnell, is that we as men also recognize what our purpose is. And like in fulfilling that, you know, when you have two like beings in relationship, each one should know who they are, know what their purpose is, and it could fit. It could fit in a good way, like together. If I'm over here saying I'm supposed to be doing this and doing that, and someone else, your partner is like, oh, I'm supposed to be, then it could be a difficult situation to. But if we understand each other's purpose, so it's up to us to, as Black men, to say, man, what am I here for? What did God create me for? And a lot of things that I've learned, you know, in my journey is, you know, man, a lot of men, whether, you know, it doesn't matter like what, you know, I'm not talking about like, you know, what your gender preference, or, you know, you could be gay man, straight man. But men, we you know, we bring, like, we have vision, we do have leadership, and we like to provide and be protectors of our families and things. And those are things by nature that we want to do. And women have their qualities of leadership, and they have their qualities of being caring and loving and all that. And what I'm saying is understanding each other is really important in us moving forward as Black men and Black families and loved ones, whether it's you know, a gay partnership, you know, straight partnership, is just understanding those roles and recognizing the value in each other. And I know those are broad strokes to what
no, it's good. Well, you know, you said something that's really important. This part about men needing, what I hear is, we can't love as Black men, whether you're cisgender, trans, it doesn't matter, right? Like, regardless of your gender identity, your sexual preferences, if we as Black men cannot do the work to love ourselves, and loving ourselves also means being able to look in the mirror and actually see the goodness in us and the monsters in us. And sometimes those monsters are things we learned and we were socialized to do. But if we don't love ourselves, right? And remember, I said to love is to not lie. It's impossible. It will be impossible to love and respect Black women however they exist in the world. So a big part of that work is also us doing work on ourselves, to heal ourselves, to transform ourselves. You know, I often say, when we talk about the big P word, like patriarchy, people hate to hear that word. And I say to folks, patriarchy don't just kill, it doesn't just harm women. It harms us too. You know why? Because it gives us a really small version of the big human that we really could be, right? It fits us into a small box, as opposed to allowing us to it's a cage for some people, right? That could allow us to be really free. And that is where love, for me, comes in.
And you know, you said some important things, and it made me, you know, it sparked even more thought about, like, for me, like what we've been taught, like, even from different generations of what it is to be a Black man. And some of it could have been validated for what conditions that our ancestors were going through. And some of it was taught in pain and passed on from pain and hurt. And so some of the things as Black men, we do have to, as you say, in love, find that truth and find which parts are really actually, it's a truth, but it's a lie. Like, meaning, oh, I ain't supposed to show my feelings, or, man, if I want mental health support, that ain't, you know, that's crazy. That ain't, you know, you're weak if you're doing that. That's actually a lie, but it's the truth that we hear that. And I think us going to those places that are vulnerable, that are caring, that are fearful places for ourselves, and actually acknowledging that and moving forward with it, and figuring ways to work through those things, as you said, work on self. Actually, work on self is probably one of the most important things that we can do on this planet. Because you know, all the work that we do, if we're not working on self, man, you know, you could be the greatest activist, you could be the greatest artist, greatest athlete, but man, you won't even have the joy and happiness that you were created to have if you don't work on yourself. So I really salute you, applaud you, and thank you for saying working on self.
Listen, I'm sitting over here like I'm in church giving all my amens in the background because that's real work. Final question really is the advice you'll give to people who are listening in on this, who want to be more involved in the fight for justice and equality and equity, who want to dedicate their time to helping others. What would you say? What would be your final words to folk?
I would say that it's really valuable to your life when you do work for others. And at times our days feel so busy that we got to take care of ourselves and our own. And we do have to make sure we allot time to do those things. But the more you daily put into practice doing for others, working towards some of the community work or goal work that you talked about, you do that daily, the more it becomes a part of you and the more fulfilled you are. I mean, it's just naturally who we are as human beings, that we created to look out for one another and care for one another and see the joy and happiness in each other. And when you put the effort and manage your time and discipline yourself to do that and know that you could always continue to do more, man, it's life-changing. It's world-changing. So, I mean, I'm encouraging and I guess the word is imploring. I'm just basically saying, please, we need you. I need you. Darnell needs you. Black people need you. The world needs you. Do whatever you can to build on yourself and for others on this planet. And I guarantee you'll live a happier life.
100% agree. I just want to thank you for taking the time to have this conversation, but really for the example you've been leading for many years, for many of us, and all the work that you do, and also the dope music, of course. But we appreciate.
Hey, I got a project. It's called A Beautiful Revolution.
Wow.
Part 1.
We ready.
It's coming, man. I want you. I wasn't even, I was supposed to not even be talking about it, but I feel like this is the space where I would talk about it. It's a beautiful revolution. Just look out for it. Thank you for saying something about the music, because I'm inspired right now. I'm ready to just let this music be out on the
Listen,
world.
Toni Morrison, to borrow, like to quote her, not correctly, but she pretty much said, when artists find ourselves in times of trouble like this, the best thing that we can do is create.
Yes.
So thank you. We're looking forward to it. Much love. Yep.
Love.
Wow. What a powerful conversation. And if there's one thing I kind of take from that is, it's a quote that I've really kind of loved since I've ever heard it. And that is, we can't serve the people or lead the people if we don't love the people. And so again, we're just so thankful for this amazing conversation. All right, so here's what we need you all to do. I need you all right now, go to votetolive.org and make your plan to vote. We know that early voting will be open in almost every state in the country over the next few days. And don't wait for election day. Voting early is safe and it's easy. And you can bring a friend or a family member with you to go vote in person early. So go to votetolive.org and make your plan to vote now. If you requested a ballot already, make sure you get that ballot back in. Follow the directions in terms of how to fill it out. Some of them require you to put your ballot in different envelopes and then put it back into the envelope and seal it. Make sure you follow those directions very carefully. We want to make sure every one of your votes is not only cast, but counted. And so again, thank you all so much for joining us. I want to thank our amazing hosts for our first panel, Marc Lamont Hill, and panelists Franklin Leonard, Shaka Senghor, Mayor Tubbs. I also want to thank Common and thank Darnell for that amazing fireside chat. That's it for the Black Men Voting Forum. Thank you all so much for attending.
Drop.